you for the notice.
No partisan talking.
Well, it is.
Which
It
might
is-
be the same thing, but
I have 7:02 on my computer.
okay. There's still a couple of people joining us.
Okay.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year.
I think we're all ready for a new one.
I think we're ready for a new year, right?
Okay. Did everybody have to power their brain? I powered my brain down, so I had to bring it back again, and I think it was
Yeah,
kind
that's
of,
why the agenda was so late getting to you. Powering the brain up with a task.
it's, yeah, major task, isn't it? Okay, so I guess we'll go ahead and start. If we, just a quick review of scheduling. So we have tonight, and we're going to cover policing. Probably Susan is going to cover pre-trial. I don't have the name of that because I wasn't thinking pre-trial procedures. And then there's a couple, the next couple of ones we could read together if we have time. They're pretty short. The rest of them then will be on Thursday, what is it? I don't have my calendar. Is that the
14.
14th? Thursday the 14th from 7 till 9. And then on Martin Luther King Day, on that day, we will do the consensus. And that will start at 7. And hopefully, because we've gone over the questions, we'll be able to cover that in that 2-hour time frame. My notes here. So on policing, the reason that we're doing this whole thing on criminal justice is to come up, there's the focus of a lot of the criminal justice reform is around reducing mass incarceration. And like the state league and other people, they say that the only way that we're going to be able to reduce that is to change our policing procedures. And right now, it's going to have to involve a complete new way of thinking about what policing is. Right now, policing in the US is seen more as a punitive approach, maybe, that often leads to time behind bars, but not always in a way that makes the community safer. And we need to go to where the police are seen more as guardians, to serve and protect, guardians, instead of a warrior mentality kind of that we have right now in a lot of the procedures that are used. So that's kind of what we're looking at. The league, and a lot of information they sent us was based around a task force that was put into place under Obama in 2014. And it was to find a way for law enforcement to change. I lost my notes. The task of it was to find a way for law enforcement to be able to work to provide community safety, and at the same time to well, I don't have that down. I don't know where I have. Anyway, all right, forget that thought because I don't have it. So I think the way to do this, I'm kind of going to go like what Ann Masters did when she did restorative justice. She kind of went over information that helps inform us on the issue and then looked at the questions, and it was easier to address them. So this task force that the president came up with ended up with like 6 pillars that policing should look like in a democratic society. And that's what the league based their consensus questions on. Plus they added another one another one about another question. So I'm going to share my screen here. If you I'm not gonna be able to see your faces, so if you have a question, you'll just speak up, maybe identify yourself, or else raise your hand and other people can call on you. So let me see if I can get this now. Sharing my screen. How did I do that? Okay, just give me a second. Share screen. How did I do that the last time? People help me. Oh gosh, I worked this out right before, and now I don't see how to get back to screen. Okay,
There we go.
there we go. Now this website is called Campaign Zero, and I want to look at it. It came out of the Black Lives Matter movement. It started, and I like it because it integrates recommendations from communities, research organizations, and that President Task Force report on 21st century policing. And it makes it pretty clear. This is the 10 things that they think about policing. They're saying that no matter, as we talked before, that some things like implicit bias training are not really working so well. And they said we have had different studies through different years about how to improve the policing, and they haven't been acted on. So no matter how much you try to change the culture and some things, there's really not going to be change unless you change the laws. And that there is bipartisan support for that to happen. It takes a willpower of elected officials from the federal level, state level, and local level to be willing to do that, to put teeth in, in the changes. So these are some things. If you look here, it says end broken windows policing. I think sometimes we don't know, or for myself, I learned some things about policing, things that we don't know that goes on because we don't see them happen so much here. And so we might wonder, well, what is everybody so upset about? So this broken windows policing is a form of policing where it came out of thought that the crime happens in communities where there's disruption and things aren't there's disruption and maybe decay or different things, like there will be more crime will come in an area that, like where the, the streets are dirty, or where there's graffiti, or, people loitering on the streets and things like that, will create an environment where more crime happens. And so if you do the things that corrects those things, then it makes crime less to happen. They also found, though, that one reason that kind of policing is popular, especially was in New York and places, is that a lot of times people who have committed serious crimes or more serious crimes are involved in some of that low-level crime. And when they round up people or stop people for doing low-level things, they end up catching people who have warrants or people who have been involved in more serious crimes. And they can apprehend them in a way like that. So that's one reason they've been doing a lot of broken windows offenses. But if you can see here where it says policy solutions. Now, the thing about this site is these are all data-driven policy solutions. And this study was approved by policing, I don't have the name of the organizations, but by whoever the top police forces have approved these recommendations. So it says in police, can you see that little marijuana leaf there?
Mm-hmm.
So this activity, the following activities do not threaten public safety and are often used to police Black communities. This came out of Black Lives Matter too, so it's going to highlight the racial aspects. But this happens in other communities besides Black communities. Decriminalize these activities or deprioritize them for enforcement. So consumption of alcohol on streets. You know, it's illegal places, maybe here, I don't know, is it still illegal here to drink alcohol on the street? I'm not
Yeah.
sure. Marijuana possession, disorderly conduct, trespassing, loitering, disturbing the peace, which include loud music, playing your music too loud, spitting, jaywalking, bicycling on the sidewalk, prostitution. These are all things that people can be stopped for, arrested for, and then that, you know, then that puts them like in the system, or they have fine, you know, incarceration where there's, not saying that exactly right, but they become criminal activities. And I think some communities see it as over policing. Then it says in profiling and stop and frisk. So that's another thing, is like stopping and frisking. You see that maybe in the bigger cities more, probably not, not around here, where established enforceable protections against profiling to prevent police from intervening in civilian lives for no reason other than the suspicion of their blackness or other aspects of their identity. This would include, so yeah, like you can't stop them. Protections of immigration status, age, housing status. You can read their sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, HIV status, race, religion, national origin as protected groups. You can't profile them based on any of those things. The right for people to seek court orders to stop police departments from profiling. Profiling, I do, you know, like in Clinton County, when I was working on immigration stuff, they would stop people, you know, maybe when they were looking for, although I don't think they were really working with the police, but some places, the police, if they're working with immigration department, they will, you know, profile and stop people that look Hispanic or look, you know, like they could be from Latinos of some, or from some country, and then check their immigration status. Not all police do that, though. That is, I will say that in a different place. Plan stops for movements such as reaching for your waistband or acting nervous. You know, ban stops for being in a high crime area. If you're in a high crime area, you could stop. People often hear that the police stop someone because they matched a generalized description of a suspect. They have to require the officers to establish objective justification for making a stop and to report every stop, including location, race, gender, whether force was used, and whether a firearm was found. And the use of what's that word? Predictive policing technology, which uses systemically biased data to enhance police profiling. I would have to stop and even think about what that one means.
Carol,
Uh-huh.
is there any way to make what you have up there clearer?
Well,
And I can't read it.
someone else said they couldn't read it either. I just took it right off of the, how could I don't know how to make it clearer.
Okay, just asking. Okay, I'll just listen clear.
Well, it's hard to listen to this if you're not reading it. So they have these things here are ending profiling and frisk. These are all reasons that will stop people with only suspicious activity of what the police consider suspicious activity, and gives them a reason to stop someone. Established alternative approaches to mental health crisis. And this is under that's almost another whole section on the mental health crisis. Should not be excuses for heavy-handed police interventions, best handled by mental health professionals. We know, you know, they've just started the, and I don't know if that's part of the broken windows, but policing. In Missouri now, where they just said, you know, this is the first place in the country that they are starting that to divert calls that come in and put them through the behavioral, put them through like social workers and people that are trained in handling mental people with mental disturbances.
Can they go out into the community though? Are they allowed to?
Can they do what?
Sometimes, do they dispatch them out to the community? At this point?
Yes, that, and this is this is policy solution. I don't know why they have that exactly under here, but they are, yes, they're just starting this now, and it's like, and they will be directed when they do a 911 call. It'll be, in that case, it will be directed to, if it's, the people will be trained, the dispatchers are trained, how to screen the calls. And they will be, if they think that it's someone that's having a mental health crisis, then they have teams that will not be the police that will be sent. It's other teams that will be sent.
The mental health crisis people want the police to come with them, though. And this is not new. This is policies that in at least the larger cities, even in our county, have police who are trained and who are labeled in some way within their department as mental health specialists who are sent to deal with these issues. So it's not new.
Well, I don't think this one, I don't think, from what, I haven't really read a lot about it, but from what I did here in St. Louis is that they are not sending, maybe in some circumstances they will send trained police, but that a lot of the calls will be diverted away from police and police will not be sent. It will be other
Okay.
responders.
But what's going on in Illinois? We're doing an Illinois study, and
Right.
we're totally different from St. Louis and Missouri. We are certainly more proactive in a lot of these areas.
Well, and we need to note that when we will note that when we do the study and say, that this isn't, which practices, I need to note that which practices are
Okay.
not, we don't have in Illinois.
And my second comment is when you're talking about all that stuff in the beginning, like loitering and police stops and suspicions, that's different from the mental health issue, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And that is being, I see that happening in this area too, where they sometimes will target kids certain ages and so forth.
Where do you see that? And where do you get your information?
Earlier,
I'm sorry?
you talked about it earlier. You talked about, looking at who they're targeting. You said it was just big cities. It's not just big cities. It's
Well,
small.
how do you know that? I mean, I'd be interested in how you know it's being done locally.
Because I worked in schools and I know of kids that were targeted. I also know a young gentleman that was, the police were, the person had no record for a while, for early on when they were younger, and the police were, a same police officer was always showing up at his work when they knew that he was done and watched if he had a broken light, and finally he went to the courthouse, and this particular police officer was suspended for a while, and he
Through
was
the
not-
courthouse? The courthouse did that?
That was I believe it was a Glen Carbon police.
Oh,
Yep. So, but I know other instances.
I don't think that's true. I'm sorry.
I know it's true because I know the person.
Well, I worked up until a couple of years ago in the criminal justice system.
Okay. Well, this happened probably about 2 years ago.
Well, I think we can't assume that these things don't happen here.
I agree. My name,
Yeah, but I'm saying we're talking about putting out policies.
I know, but you were talking about profiling and some of the things that are done, and somebody made a comment that only happens in big cities. I'm saying,
Well, no, that's not true. It's more prevalent. But I think when you're putting out policies, you also have to recognize that those policies exist already. I think a lot of what the problem is the mentality and the makeup of certain individuals who are in law enforcement, not so much that we don't have the policies that already exist.
I agree with you.
I mean,
Absolutely.
they're there. They tell you what to do and what not to do. And you talk about, targeting people and you're not supposed to, suspicions. Well, you're not supposed to stop someone with just suspicions. That's in the law. I mean, that's from the Supreme Court. But when you have certain individuals who, and I don't know what the solution is there, but
Well, I
certain
think,
individuals in the departments,
How about accountability of police officers when they do misbehave?
that would certainly help.
When
But
in Ferguson, our city defenders did a study. There are 89 municipalities in St. Louis County. They did a study of 52 different municipalities, completely separate police jurisdictions. And all of the stops that they had, white people were more likely to have guns and they were more likely to have illegal drugs than black people in every single municipality. But who gets stopped more? That's the danger of profile.
but it's more, I believe, what I'm saying is I believe it's more a problem of the individuals who are in those positions.
so that is why we have to have laws at the state level, at local. Most policing comes, at community and county level, but there has to be laws, like you said, that enforce accountability. What happens when people do this? You can't leave it up to, the policies are there, but you can't leave it up to individual police forces to oversee their own actions. There needs to be a state law or, some consequences that will happen.
Is that one of the proposals from the league?
I think it is when we get to the questions, yes,
Okay.
proposals.
I'm just saying a lot of this stuff is already the law.
But even if it's a law, it doesn't mean that that people are held accountable for it and have to document what they did. Wouldn't that fall under something like community oversight, where I know in Edwardsville, they talked about the police having that community oversight where they would review with this community group each arrest and what had happened. And, so there was some external oversight over it.
Let's look at community oversight on the screen now. So yes, that is community oversight so police usually investigate and decide what, if any, consequences their fellow officers should face in cases of police misconduct. They're saying here, so we need a way to hold people, for the community to help hold people accountable. And this is establishing, the policy solution would be establishing effective civilian oversight structures. And they have a police commission there. The police commission, the structure would include a police commission and civilian complaint officers. And I don't know if we want to read through all of those, but some of the things like the police commission should determine the policy for the police department based on community input and expertise. Discipline and dismiss police officers, hold public disciplinary hearings, select the candidates for police chief to be hired by the mayor, evaluate and fire the police chief if needed, not have current, former, family, or police officers as members of the police commission, select its members from candidates offered by community organizations. And then there's a civilian complaint office, which would receive, investigate, and resolve all civilian complaints against the police in 120 days. Be allowed to interrogate officers less than 48 hours after an incident where deadly force is used. These are just some of the things. You can read through these on the website more if you want to look at these. It said be housed in a separate location from the police department. And it talks about funding, be funded at an amount no less than 5% of the total police department budget. Now, these are recommendations.
Who funds it?
I don't know about that.
That's the problem. But go ahead.
It would come out of the total police department budget, I guess.
Mhm.
Have at least one.
Okay, but the issue, I know just throwing out stuff, but how does a department like Venice that can barely survive itself have where there might potentially be more of these issues?
Right.
have the money to enact all of this stuff. I'm just.
That's
think
that's a good question. It's how to, where is that? Can that be done on a county level, or that's a good question is how,
It's got to almost be done on a state or federal level. I mean, even a county level, well, that's at least better than an individual city or
right?
village. But that's,
Some,
you
some of
have to
these,
make sure you have a good funding source when you put these, I mean, this is a lot. That would be a substantial task. And we need more than that for funding.
What do we have? So in Glen Carbon, when you were on the police thing, what locally is, do we have in place for community? Do we have something like this?
They have actually two different sources that oversee the police. There's a police commission and then there's a police committee, which are, the committee deals more with discipline issues that are brought within the department.
Are those all police officers on those commissions, or do we have any?
Oh, no. They are, when I was on it, there was a banker and a dentist. And before that, the other two gentlemen were retired, whatever, civilians. They were not police officers. And then there's another commission and it deals with other issues. But I think any complaints are investigated through the police department right now.
Mhm.
You know, if a citizen had a complaint, they would go
Right.
through the chief and the chief would do an investigation.
And that's one of the recommendations to change is
Right.
that, right? is
And
to change.
again, that's going to require
Right.
funding. And
Well, then maybe that comes from the state. So we have to look at funding when we get on is where does the funding for this come from?
I just want to throw that out to keep that in mind because all of this costs. Studies are great. I think they're wonderful, but they throw out all these issues that everyone would love to solve, but there's no money behind it.
And the problem, so there has to be a rethinking of how we use our money, how we use the money. And that's, I think that partly comes out of maybe when they talk about defunding the police, it doesn't, it means that maybe some of the money that we use on the way that we're using that goes towards having police officers do things and sometimes that doesn't necessarily make the community safer, is that there's other ways that money should be used. And this might, this is one of them, maybe, is helping to.
Well, somebody has to pay mental health specialists too. And they're certainly not the most respectfully treated by the state as far as funding goes either. You're talking about another agency that doesn't get funded.
Right.
As needed, and using them in another capacity that you have to make sure they're getting paid too. And I don't think the police department should be required, to if they're going to give up enforcement of these areas, then somebody else ought to fund the mental health people, not the police.
Right. Well, we have to.
Well, but some of the funds that are now going to those police who are handling those calls could certainly be diverted to the social workers or whoever it is that's doing it.
You can have monetary assessment. It would be hard to do. Because if I was a mental health worker, and you're going into a volatile situation, which a lot of mental health issues are, not on any fault of the person, it's just, their reaction and what problems they may or may not be causing that would cause another individual to call a police agency, that person's going to want to have support behind them. So you're talking about two agencies being involved, which is great because the mental health worker would know how. My daughter has done this. She's been called by local departments when it involves kids who are in, what's the word? What does she do, Carol?
Trauma.
No, foster care.
Oh,
And she's been called to Troy. She's worked with Troy. She's worked with Edwardsville. But I certainly wouldn't want her going into a situation like that alone.
I worked for the Magdala Foundation in St. Louis, and we did this work. Magdala Foundation funded social workers. I, of course, was a psychologist that were housed in the police station, sent to any domestic violence, of calls that weren't police calls, and we had radios so that we could call for police backup in the case that the situation became a police situation. So
I think, and I think also, yes, there's where they send the workers along. I just, I know there was one of the people that was killed recently was someone who had mental health problems, and it had happened before, and the mother called and said, my son has schizophrenia. He has these times, when he goes, has a, call it an attack, but has a episode, and the police came and he ended up being killed. But, she said in times before, there would be an ambulance or there would be paramedics or some people who could talk him down or knew how to address that issue. And then he would be taken to the hospital where his condition, would be addressed. And, and that would be like you get a 911 call, and a woman says, my son is schizophrenic. He has these conditions, what happens. Then I would think that would be an instance where they would screen that call towards other than police force.
And Carol, that's what I'm saying. That exists already.
Well, it might exist, but I don't know how often it's done that way.
Well,
I
Okay.
think part of what's going on is that we need to really consider funding. And you keep bringing that up, and I think it's right on target. I was listening to a story on NPR, and this may be the one that dealt with the Magdala Foundation, Rachel, over in St. Louis. They were talking about how there was this program, I think in the 80s, where social workers were kind of embedded in the police department and would be out there doing things like that, so the police didn't have to do it. But that was all run under a grant. There was a federal grant for it. When that grant ran out, there was no money for it. The police were not going to give up some of their budget to fund that, even though they really liked the services. Everybody thought it was working very well, but there was no money for it without the federal grant. And so the police started in doing their old police stuff and trying to do everything, and they're not really equipped for that. And I think that funding is really where things are funded is the core for it. And I think we can be aware of that defund the police thing, but I think that is a political dead end because of the way that's phrased.
it's a policy consideration.
Mhm.
It shouldn't be up to the police to voluntarily give up their money. That has to be a policy of the state of Illinois, probably,
Yes.
or that was the program I worked in, right?
Yeah.
Worked
It was wonderful, but they had a federal grant. So we need to talk about finding some kind of state level or external funding instead of taking money away from the police, because I think that's a political dead end.
yeah.
Well,
I wish
policies, we have to, I think the citizens as a country, we're going to have to put the pressure, to say that's a political dead end. We have to put the pressure on and say, you got to come up with the political courage to make these changes that have to be made. And the pressure has to be there. And there is bipartisan support for these changes. A lot of places. There is a lot of.
Man, that is a long, rocky road, though. I really think that to make these effective, we need to look at, how will we fund something like this? Would we do it in 1 or 2 counties as a test? Would we do grant writing to get the funds for it? Would we look at some kind of federal funding to bring that in on a test basis instead of mandating it for everybody when we don't have the budget for it? I just think you have to be realistic about it and have a good example of where it's working. So then another county might look at it and say, oh, that's working really well. Let's do that too.
Right.
Okay, let's look at these others and keep funding in mind for all of these things.
I think this policy, we're establishing a policy.
Mhm.
And you have to establish the policies and then decide which ones you're going to fund.
I think, yeah, but I think like Susan said, maybe that some of these policies are there, but they're not, yeah, enforced or funded, I guess. So it's I think it's kind of useless to make legislation if you're not going to fund it, but
Mhm.
Do it every day.
I guess. So let's look at limiting use of force. A policy solution would be to establish standards and reporting of police use of deadly force. Authorize deadly force only when there is imminent threat to an officer's life or the life of another person, and such force is strictly unavoidable to protect life as required under international law. Deadly force should only be authorized after all other reasonable alternatives have been exhausted. What I was reading is that, like some states or city have this, are putting this as part of their policies. I don't think they all have this as part of their policies that says this.
It's national law. I mean, it's Supreme Court law, Carol. Every state has to have that policy.
Well, then how are they getting, all right.
I mean,
I
I've got the
need
book
to look
right in Illinois. I've opened it up to use of force. It's just almost what you read.
Off only when there's,
Much
all
more
right.
restrictive than what you read.
So it's probably comes down to police culture. A lot of it then is police
Yes.
culture. But so let me read through these. Require that an officer's tactical conduct and decisions leading up to using deadly force be considered in judgments of whether such force was necessary. Require officers to give a verbal warning when possible before using deadly force, and give people a reasonable amount of time to comply with the warning. Require reporting the police killings and serious injuries of civilians, and require the names of both officers involved and the victims to be released within 72 hours of a deadly force incident. One thing on this that I read about, so there was an example of one report I was reading said that most of the time when there is a killing, it does not like the police have been backed into a corner and they have to make an immediate decision about whether to use deadly force. A lot of the times it's tactical decisions that they made that led them up to having to do that. And the one example that stuck in my mind was there was I think he ended up to be 14, but there was a young person in the park. A call came in for a young person in the park that had a gun. So the police, went up and drove up in their cars and jumped out. And within a very short time, he was killed because, the officers got out with their guns. They got out and whatever he had, I don't remember if it was really even a gun. They felt, threatened, and they shot him. And they said that what could have happened is that they would have come up and parked somewhere, on the side of the park and walked to a point where they could survey, see what was really going on and what he had, and then get a warning, for them, to do something. And then it could have been, addressed possibly without what happened. But it was tactical decisions that they made in advance of.
What happened to the officers?
I don't know what happened to the officers.
Well, that's the follow-up is the problem.
It is, but it's also this is also a training thing, is how are they trained, and tactical conduct, is are they trained to approach situations such as
at least in Illinois, again, they're required to have that training. I taught the classes.
Okay.
You're required to have those classes in the law and in the tactics. I mean, it's required before you become a police officer and as you continue through.
Okay.
I think it's your selection of officers in the beginning, the
Well, it
mentality.
is that we'll
And
get to that part. That is
What
too
happens
right.
afterwards? You know, what happens to that person who doesn't follow the rules, the police officer?
He
Okay.
got,
We've got
that was it.
problems now.
That was in Cleveland. That kid was 12 years old. They shot him 2 seconds before,
Yeah.
after they got out of the car. That guy had been fired from another police department, and Cleveland had hired him without checking the background. That's what happened. And he did
And
get fired. He didn't get fired, but he didn't get charged with any crime.
But then that's what needs to be done
Well, that is another policy solution.
for murder.
Well, and there's another, that's a policy solution that is proposed, you know, that police officers who have been, you know, dismissed for some reason of misconduct can't be rehired again.
That's a good policy.
And evidently that policy is not in place, you know, but
And
that
you know,
is,
supposedly, like in Glen Carbon, you have to pass a psychological test before you can be hired. But
yes,
I
there's another,
know people on the police force who, I don't know how they pass those, you know.
I don't think that's as good as having somebody's criminal history or history of being fired in front of you. I mean, that's the best predictor of your behavior, honestly, is what did you do already to get fired? See, every police force is so separate, and I don't think there's a way that it's coordinated, which it should be.
Right,
Well,
that's part of the problem. It's separate databases, so one department doesn't know the officer's been fired from, 2 states away.
well,
and
it's also, we will get to about looking at the union and the police, how the police union is instrumental in a lot of those protections of officers.
Right. A lot of times it's easier, and this goes through our entire legal system. It's easier to say, okay, if you'll resign,
Mhm.
then we won't do anything else further in this investigation. And you don't have any fights, you don't have any issues, you don't have any problems. And then that person can just go, to the next state and say, no, I quit because I didn't like the school district or whatever,
And you never get to the root of why it happened.
Exactly.
And part of the policy is that this also has to all be transparent, should be transparent to the public. It shouldn't be hidden information, it should be transparent when there's disciplinary, things, actions against policemen and stuff, that should be transparent so that people can watch that. So under this, they still have revised and strengthened local police departments' use of force policies. So I guess some of this is the laws. Maybe they give examples here, which I haven't looked into. This use of force policy should require officers to restrict officers from using deadly force unless all reasonable alternatives have been exhausted. Now they give an example of the Philadelphia PD Police Department policy. And I didn't read that. I should have looked at that. Use minimum amount of force to apprehend a subject with specific guidelines for the types of force and tools authorized for a given level of resistance. There is, so go back, ban using force on a person for talking back or as punishment for running away. Ban chokeholds, strangleholds, hog tying and transporting people face down in a vehicle. That can lead to health, people, especially, it affects your body and your system, even depending on your health is, I guess. Intervene to stop other officers who are using excessive force and report them to a supervisor. In a lot of police forces, what do they call that? A blue something, there's police officers are, there's pressure for policemen not to report on other officers. Have first aid kits immediately render medical assistance to anyone in police custody who is injured or who complains of an injury. In traffic-related police killings and dangerous high-speed police chases. I know this is, these policies have changed in Illinois. I know, they've recent experience in Brooklyn where I know they don't chase them out of their own boundaries anymore. Shooting at moving vehicles. There's a report where somebody, an officer was on a bridge even and shot at a moving vehicle that was going under the bridge on the highway where there was already police set up down there to deal with the situation. And I know it was, that came up in an article about the court, Supreme Court or whoever. There hadn't been a precedent set for that before or something, reason that he got off, with that.
In Illinois, again?
No, I don't know that it was in Illinois. Moving in front, and prohibit police officers from moving in front of a moving vehicle, get out of the way, high speed chases of people who have not or are not about to commit a violent felony. And monitor how police use force and proactively hold officers accountable for excessive force. So report all uses of force to database. One of the questions deals with gathering statistics and reporting what goes on. Establish an early intervention system to correct officers who use excessive force. It says these systems have been shown to reduce the average number of complaints against officers in a police department by more than 50%. An early intervention system. This system should report officers who receive 2 or more complaints in the past month, report officers who have 2 or more use of force incidents or complaints in the past quarter, require officers to attend retraining and be monitored by an immediate supervisor after their first quarterly report, and terminate an officer following multiple reports. Require police departments to notify the state when an officer is found to have willfully violated department policy or the law, committed official misconduct, or resigned while under investigation for these offenses, which is what Susan said, not allowing them to just resign. Maintain this information in a database accessible to the public, and prohibit these officers from serving as police officers, teachers, or other governmental employees.
Whoa. Wrong.
Talking to Josh, my son-in-law, who was in Afghanistan, he had a friend who came out with head injuries, who, was on disability for head injuries and had a temper anger problem because of that and was hired as a police officer. So I mean, that doesn't exactly fit in here, I guess, but.
Yeah,
Well, it does, because it's probably there's no one would think that was a good policy, but it still is done.
Yeah, because people that come out of the military have military training, and they have, skills that could be useful, but it depends. Are they more, I think a lot of times, my own personal opinion is that people that come out of the military that become policemen have been trained with a military mentality, which is different than how our police forces should be trained as a guardian. There's a different idea there.
I don't agree with that, Carol.
No,
But they do get, usually most police departments give you extra points
Mhm.
on scale or their determination scale if you were in the military. But I know a lot of officers, including my daughter-in-law, who came out of the military trained. And I think there's a more discipline with those people, and they are less likely to have bias against minorities for being in the military.
I hope that's true. I just think the military people are trained. They might have discipline, but they're not trained.
They're trained to do alternative thinking more than people who come in off the street with their gung-ho attitude. Because you can't
have to see.
You just can't go out and do a raid or whatever. You have to there's planning, there's training, there's alternatives. I find those people to be much better trained, not as a whole, obviously, but then what you get at the training academy for however a month.
Right.
A month's training is a lot different than 2 years training.
Right. One thing said like in New Jersey, that might come up later, but in New Jersey or somewhere, you had to have like 1,200 hours training to be a barber, but 700 hours training to be a police officer. But so this next one is independent. If you look at this chart here on the solutions chart, let me go back to that chart. It shows, this chart has yellow here under community representation, this little triangle, body cams, film the police, and training. I guess as we go over those, but these are ones that the data shows have not been as effective and as some of the others. And so this task force and people, the recommendations coming out of this is to focus on the other ones where policy can make a difference more. But this is independently investigate and prosecute. Policy solutions. Local prosecutors rely on local police departments to gather the evidence and testimony they need to successfully prosecute criminals. It makes it hard for them to investigate and prosecute the same police officers in case of police violence. These cases should not rely on the police to investigate themselves and should not be prosecuted by someone who has an incentive to protect the police officers involved. Lower the standard of proof for Department of Justice civil rights investigations of police officers.
Oh, come on.
Allow federal prosecutors to successfully prosecute police officers' misconduct by passing legislation to eliminate the requirement that an officer must willfully deprive another's rights in order to violate this section. That you can't, unless you really look into what they're talking about there, that's hard to understand what they're saying.
Well, and why should well,
What?
never mind.
Well, because that, I mean, this is part, when I was reading the Department of Justice and there's a difference, a variance in opinion, even in the court systems, of what it means to willfully deprive another person's rights. It's not a standard thing.
Why don't you just use the good old state laws? And everybody,
About the state laws.
if you intentionally or knowingly hurt someone, then you should be prosecuted for it. There's no willful or wanton or anything like that. If you have a civil rights violation, you're not going to get much out of it. And you can look back in the civil rights times where people were prosecuted because the states didn't prosecute, but the states are more than willing, or should be more than willing, to prosecute. And they have the standards where everybody is treated the same. The police officers aren't given any kind of benefits or protections.
Yeah, I don't think that's, well, I don't know that that's how that really plays out. I have to pull up, that's a question, and I can research that and cite the things where it shows us the court cases where they have not prosecuted because of that, not a difference of what does that mean to willfully deprive, where some judges will say that's
federal, Carol, that's not state.
Well, I don't know. I have to see.
Yeah, willful is not, that's not in our state laws.
Okay. Use federal funds to encourage independent investigations and prosecutions. So there's talking about funding past legislation such as the Police Training and Independent Review Act of 2015, which I did not look up, or use of existing federal funds to encourage external independent investigation and prosecution of police killings. So they're talking about federal funding.
Yep.
Establish a permanent special prosecutor's office at the state level for cases of police violence. The special prosecutor's office should be required and authorized to prosecute all cases where police kill or seriously injure a civilian, in custody deaths, and in cases where a civilian alleges criminal misconduct against a police officer. So you have a special prosecutor's office. They're saying because local prosecutors, it's hard for them sometimes to prosecute the police who they depend on to help them.
I agree. It creates a conflict.
So there should be a special prosecutor's office at the state level. Do we have that in Illinois?
There's not a specific office, but if you have a case like that arise, in my opinion, you can give it to either the Attorney General's office or the Office of the Appellate Prosecutor, two different independent state agencies,
Who can give it to them?
the state's attorney in the county should
And-
give up prosecution and turn it over to those two independent.
So this is saying that there would be, it should not be up to the state's attorney to give it over. It would be mandated that it automatically goes to special prosecutor's office.
Well,
Because-
yeah,
Well,
that's
some,
fine. You're asking if we had one of those
right,
agencies. We don't, but we have two state agencies who can do those cases right now. I mean, if you put a mandate out tomorrow, if the legislature came out and said every case, blah, 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 cannot be handled by the local prosecutor, you've got two agencies right there. You don't need any funding. You don't need anything. They're already there.
okay, then in Illinois, we need a thing that says that any special thing of this happening, case where police kill or seriously injure a civilian, automatically goes to those two offices and not, it's
Well,
not.
why not any complaint? Why not any? Why does it have to be serious? Any complaint of police brutality and of any form should go to an independent agency.
Okay, that's a good policy.
And you've got this police officer out there. You're exactly right. You have to depend upon him to come to court and testify about the burglary.
Right. So you're not going to want to
turn
prosecute.
around and charge him with something, like a aggravated battery or something, to where he's going to get on the stand and the defense attorney is going to, tear him apart for that and distract from the underlying case. But those two agencies are there. Like we were talking about the need for funding in so many areas, we've got it in Illinois. We've got two separate agencies set up right now that the state could mandate those cases go to.
Well, then that's maybe some policy that we should suggest in Illinois, that it's mandated that those go to those two agencies.
Oh, it's
That's
perfect.
a wonderful idea.
There's also, I just saw a thing, Katie Stewart just had it on her Facebook page that she said, now's the time for people to propose legislation that should be considered. And it said it should be like by January something, which is pretty soon,
Ooh,
but that this is a time when we could suggest either as a league or as individuals on, some of these things. This would be one of them, maybe.
that's a
It would
great.
help.
Yeah, and take the term willful out of the standard by which they're tried. Because as Susan says, other people don't have that term in there to soften it and allow it to be interpreted that they didn't do it willfully. If they did it, they did it. Let them be the same standard as anyone else.
It's not in the state though, Rachel.
Well, it must be,
It's federal. It's federal.
it's federal, the term willful?
The civil rights violations in the federal civil rights law.
No, I'm talking about with police. I think the term willful that allows police to escape being prosecuted.
No, if they're going to be prosecuted in the state, they're prosecuted under our state laws. And willful, the only time I remember it coming up, and I could be wrong, is again, it should be taken out of there too, is under child abuse, where it has to be shown that it was a willful act of the parent, because we don't hurt our children. I think it's wrong used anyway, because it's such a strong and hard to define term. But if a police officer is found to have violated a use of force, in this state, the terms used are intentional or knowing or recklessly. We don't use willful.
All right, that might take some further investigation about on the federal, and even understanding it on a federal level. I don't have that site. I don't know where that was at, where I was reading about cases, how using that terminology got police.
Well, a lot of times it's easier to go into the civil rights violations if your local prosecutors are obstructionists. I mean, such as Louisville. You know, they went through their grand jury and they decided they're not going to do this or do that. Well, your only alternative then is to go federally, where the laws aren't as,
Mhm.
where the violations, what can happen to the officer are not as tough as under state law. But that's the only place you have left to go. And it needs to be taken out of the federal law. It would make it a lot easier there. And I'm not saying other states don't have willful. It used to be in the death penalty for whether you could apply for the death penalty. Acts had to be willful and wanton and depraved and all this kind of stuff. But we don't have the death penalty anymore, and those type of adjectives were reserved for those kind of cases. So.
Okay, well, we can see that if that's not in Illinois, you know, we can look at other states where they have that. But for this study, I guess it applies to Illinois. Require independent investigations of all cases where police kill or seriously injure civilians. Independent investigation should be required and authorized to prosecute all cases where police kill or seriously injure a civilian in custody deaths we had, and cases where civilian alleges misconduct. Required to investigate all cases where police kill chosen at random, chosen at random from a list of the largest 10 agencies in the state. What? All cases where police kill chosen at random from a list of the largest 10 agencies. I don't get that one. And required to report their findings to the police. So that's about, it has to be transparent. And then Susan suggested it shouldn't just be independent investigations about police killing or seriously injuring, but also in cases of misconduct. Should be independent solution.
Yeah.
Community representation, I have to speed this up a little bit. Community representation this is one that doesn't show to be as effective. Increase the number of civilian first responders who reflect the communities they serve. While racial and gender diversity within law enforcement has increased nationwide and many police departments have implemented community policing models, recent research suggests these approaches are not effective at reducing police violence. As such, we caution cities against emphasizing these strategies as solutions. Rather, cities should prioritize shifting resources to instead hire more civilian first responders, conflict de-escalators, and violence interrupters from underrepresented communities. What does that say to you?
It says that just changing the picture, the face of the police department doesn't change the culture of the police department.
Okay, right. You're right, that is what it says. Use community feedback to inform police department policies and practices. Require a regular survey. I guess Milwaukee has this, I didn't look at it, to be fielded to the community to gauge their experiences and perceptions of the police, and use this information to inform police department policies and practices and police officer evaluations and discipline. People need to know that the police are listening to them and hearing what they're saying. Hold on, I'll switch here to body cams, film the police. What this is basically is going to say that this is effective is you can use body cams, policy solutions. They say due to a range of research studies finding no evidence that body cameras reduce police use of force, we caution cities against adopting new body camera programs. Places that have already implemented body cameras should ensure they are governed by the following policies, reinforcing accountability. Require officers with body cams to record all law enforcement interactions, and prevent officers from having discretion to turn the camera off. Notify subjects that they have the option to remain anonymous and stop recording or storing footage if they choose this option. What about
Read
that?
that one again.
Notify subjects that they have the option to remain anonymous and stop recording or storing footage if they choose this option.
Oh,
Notify the subject that we can stop recording if you don't want us to record you. That's what it says.
yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
I don't know. Maybe you don't want some, I don't know.
Well,
Allows,
what happens if the person comes up later? I mean, now I'm taking the devil's advocate for the police.
yeah,
What if they come back later and say, "Oh, he beat me up," blah 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 blah. Well, you've got your best evidence there with the body cam.
right,
So it's either on or it's off.
right.
And it should be on all the time. I agree with that.
Discretion to turn off your body cam is obviously just an invitation to turn it off when you're about to commit violent acts.
Right.
Well, but that part had to do with allowing the citizen to say they could turn it off.
Yeah, that part said notify subjects they have the option to remain anonymous. I don't know. Allow civilians to review footage of themselves or their relatives and request this to be released to the public and stored for at least 2 years. Because now a lot of places, what I was reading, I don't know about in Illinois, but some police forces, they do not release that footage. They won't release, and I don't know if even if that's the prosecutor too says that, we don't have to release this.
Well, if nothing is charged, then they probably are saying, that's their reason. If somebody is charged,
Even when they're charged, I think, unless there is policy that's a policy solution that says this has to be released to the public, then
okay,
it's up to the local police
There
department or
there are
prosecutor.
requirements that were put out by the state bar association, which governs prosecutors, of things that can and cannot be released to the public while a case is pending. Now, about the most that they could release was their name, what they're charged with, whether they think that there are other crime victims. They can do that in certain cases, but a prosecutor is not allowed to release any kind of information like that.
Well,
Whether
that's the current state law. That's the current state law. The
yeah,
policy recommendation here is that changes.
that would be a violation. If a prosecutor did that, that would be a violation of the professional code, and they could be disbarred for that. Now,
That
if you
could
want to
really screw up your
selectively
trial too. As
Huh?
a citizen, you wouldn't want that released if there's going to be a
Exactly.
trial.
you're what if it's bad against the person? What if it shows the person, it's gonna, then they're gonna say, oh, now you prejudiced the public against the defendant because you released all this. It's a catch-22 situation.
Well, and maybe that's the reason that they're saying that body cams, this seems to say it's not such a great thing.
Well, yeah, because it shows I shouldn't say that. Now a different bias is coming out. I mean, you either can have it, all of it, or you can have none of it. Either you want the evidence to put the officer to get the officer fired if he did wrong, but you can't tie the hands of the prosecutor and say, well, you've got good evidence here, but you can't use it. You've got to have it all. If you have an investigation, okay, why can't it be if you've got a formal investigation filed against the officer for abuse of force, then let that independent prosecutor look at the dash or the body cam.
What about in a case where
did wrong, then release it?
What about in a case where there is say someone gets killed, the family is trying to get charges against a police officer, There's no charges being brought, and they want that released to the public so the public can see that, yes, that officer should have charges brought against him.
Well, that's when you have your independent agency set up, which requires the state to investigate any claims against the officer. And then they can review it. It all can filter into that same system where you have an independent person looking at it. Then the local police don't have any yay or nay, or the local prosecutor don't have a yay or nay about releasing it. The independent person reviewing it does. And-
Okay, so that's a policy solution. They don't have that on here. Maybe that needs to be added as a solution. Is that
I
it
don't
should,
know. They're kind of talking about body cams as being bad. That's what everybody, not everybody, that's
they're
That's
saying that it doesn't give, and they're not finding the evidence that it reduces police use of force.
oh, well, that may be true because in my belief, you're going back to the mentality of the officer, not what the rules of the road are.
Well, that's what they're saying, that's what they're, all these, this policy solution is to reduce the violence of the police. And they say they're not showing that it actually reduces. It might help in prosecuting people after they commit the violence, but it's not helping to reduce it.
If we
Including
prosecute
the
people,
officer. Otherwise, you're going to be faced, if you don't have evidence like that of showing, what some of these cameras have shown in these very serious national cases that have come out, these very abusive cases, if you don't have that kind of evidence, you've got the officer's word against
Right.
the family who wasn't there. What are you going to use to get the officer fired or prosecuted?
Kathy, did you want to say something?
well, I'm just saying, look at Brianna, that was a perfect example of body cams. We can go back to them and you can hopefully eventually prosecute the ones that have done
Right.
the shooting. And if we don't have that, that's one way to get rid of the people that shouldn't be in there. So if they know there's consequences because there's body cams and they're going to be prosecuted in the long run, hopefully it reduces the type of people that want to that do these things, and the hiring practices, maybe they'll get more picky on who they're hiring and looking into their background.
Well, we might have to investigate that a little bit more about why they say that. The other thing on here they say is the right to record police. Ban police officers from taking cell phones or other recording devices without a person's consent or warrant, and give people the right to sue police departments if they take or destroy these devices.
And there is Illinois case law on that issue. Sorry to throw this in, but it happened on one of my cases where the police officer went to a house to talk to someone and the person started recording it. The officer charged them with eavesdropping, a criminal statute. And the Illinois Supreme Court said, no way. This is not a private situation. This is a public contact. They have a right to record. So,
Well, good. Then we have that in Illinois. We have that.
yep.
So this is under training. Under training here, policy solutions. This is where it says a current training regime for police officer fails to effectively teach them how to interact with our communities in a way that protects and preserves life. For example, police recruits spend 58 hours learning how to shoot firearms and only 8 hours learning how to de-escalate situations. An intensive training regime is needed to help officers learn the behaviors and skills to interact appropriately with communities. I guess that varies in different places. They're saying invest in rigorous and sustained training. Existing research literature is inconclusive on the effectiveness of training at reducing police violence. While some trainings like procedural justice training, some research support, things like implicit bias and trainings have not been found to be effective. As such, we caution cities against emphasizing more training as a solution. Rather, existing training programs should be replaced with programs that de-emphasize firearms and the use of force, and that empower communities to design and implement new training paradigms for first responders, including but not limited to procedural justice, relationship-based policing, crisis intervention, mediation, and conflict resolution, appropriate engagement with youth, appropriate engagement with LGBTQ, transgender, and gender nonconforming individuals, appropriate engagement with individuals who are English language learners, individuals from different religious affiliations, individuals who are differently abled, and de-escalation and minimizing the use of force. So I guess they're saying instead of doing like implicit bias training and things that, this other training. So maybe that these forces already are in Illinois training. I don't know.
The point is, training isn't helpful, but on the other hand, they do seem to endorse de-escalation training, which is to me what needs to be reinforced and what mental health workers need also to have a lot of training in. That's the whole point, is to de-escalate.
Mm-hmm.
De-escalate most situations. Very rare if you try that you can't. For example, a child with a toy gun.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, some efforts need to be made to de-escalate in that situation.
Yeah, you're talking, there's nothing that could have stopped or trained the officers that had contact with, and I can't, the real famous one up north, it's St. Paul, Minneapolis case.
George Floyd.
That officer violated so many basic principles of
Right.
police activities. No amount of training could have changed his behavior.
Right.
And he had a history. He had a history, George Floyd. He had a history of violence, and it was obvious that he's a person that should be gone, which is why the question of these police unions. And I think that's another, isn't that
That's
another
coming
one?
up. Yes.
Let's go.
Okay. Intentionally consider unconscious or implicit racial bias. Require current and prospective police officers to undergo that testing. We've done that. Develop a clear policy for considering an officer's level of bias. So this is kind of what in the beginning, assessing whether they have law enforcement certification, the hiring process, performance evaluations, decisions about where officers are deployed. So considering the bias in all those things. This is end for profit policing. I don't know how this goes on so much in Illinois, but this is where, police should be working to keep people safe, not contributing to a system that profits from stopping, searching, ticketing, arresting, and incarcerating people. That was a lot of the problem in Ferguson, the unrest, but even around here. In police departments, quotas for tickets and arrests. Ban police departments from using ticket or arrest quotas to evaluate the performance of police officers. And this is Illinois law, so we already have that probably as their example. That officers are not rewarded for how many tickets they write.
State police are.
They what?
State police are.
Well, this says Illinois law here, so they shouldn't, that's something to look at. Then that should be banned from them.
Commendations and all kinds of stuff for DUI arrests and ticket writing.
That should be policy that's banned. Limit fines and fees for low-income people. Pass policies requiring local governments to ban issuing fines or arrest warrants for civilians who fail to appear in court for a traffic citation. Ban generating more than 10% of your revenue from fines and fees. Allow judges discretion to waive fines and fees for low-income people or initiate payment plans. Prohibit courts from ordering individuals on parole or probation to pay supervision fees and other correctional fees. I think sometimes it's the education they need to, they were talking about, like, people sometimes they get a fine or something and they don't show up in court because they don't have the money to pay it. Where if they went to court, they would tell them, work out a plan or do something, but they don't show up to pay it for that reason. And then they have a warrant issued for their arrest. So they get in more trouble. But, because I was reading a case, where a woman didn't show up because she didn't have the money to pay. It just sent her down a whole long rabbit hole of trouble.
Well, Carol, you and I both know a situation where that exists. And I see it in what I'm doing now all the time. You get
Right.
people who don't have insurance and they
Right.
get a ticket because they get stopped for speeding and they don't have insurance.
Right.
So in order to get out of that situation, they have to buy this SR22 insurance, which is more expensive than
Right.
regular insurance. And they can't afford that. And it's just a vicious circle, so that if they go to work or go to school and they get another ticket while they're driving it, they can't, it just goes on and on and on. Then they get another ticket for not,
Yeah.
and
Right.
then their license gets suspended. And it's horrible.
And
They
then
called those, one of them called those poverty fees or something, like a lot of things that are based because, right, the people don't have money for the insurance or their plates are expired because they didn't have money to, renew their plates.
Yep. I mean, I don't know what the solution for that is. You have to have insurance because if you get in a wreck and hurt somebody, then that person, deserves to be compensated also. But
I
the
think it's a
remedy
lot, yeah.
is not to, make the fines go higher and higher, and then they don't have a license. And then if they were following the law, then they couldn't drive. And if you live in, most areas in Madison County, you don't have mass transit. to
I
get
think the one case that I was reading where that woman, like when they picked her up on a warrant, wherever she was at, then she had to stay in jail until she could have an appearance, which didn't happen right away, so it was a week before she could appear before somebody or something,
something's wrong there, because that's not the law either.
Prevent police from taking money or property of innocent people, prohibit police from seizing property of civilians unless they are convicted of a crime, and the state establishes by clear and convincing evidence that the property is subject to forfeiture. Keeping any property that has legally been forfeited, instead this property should go to a general fund, participating in a federal equitable sharing program that allows police to engage in civil asset forfeiture. New Mexico law. So I guess that's if there's a huge drug bust, maybe.
It's very crucial. This civil forfeiture is a shocking.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I'm sorry, what?
Well, a lot of,
I'm saying that I think civil forfeiture is shocking and should not be allowed. It allows the forfeiture of materials from someone who's never convicted, possibly. It does not require the crime it does not require that the crime has been convicted at all. So it's really not legal. I don't know why it exists. Judge,
And they can seize that property and they don't have to give it back?
that's right.
yes, yes, indeed.
And
Well,
I
if
believe
people
that,
object to it like they should, they have to prove that it was related to the crime in some way. But in Illinois, there's a vast number of things that if you're convicted of, you can lose your license, which, like, burglary, what does that have to do with your driver's license? But as far as forfeiture, there are good procedures if you object. A lot of times people don't object to it.
Well, I think it's a kind of a shocking thing because, as I say, the crime doesn't ever have to be proven or for
Well,
property to be taken.
no, it does. There has to be a nexus shown between the property and the crime. The property that is
Accused,
seized. There has to be a nexus shown. It may not be beyond a reasonable doubt. If it's civil,
convicted.
then there's a less burden.
Well, what about recent experience I had where it was suspected that someone did something and they took her car, impounded her car. She never was convicted of that, but if she had not been, but she had to have money, she had to pay the towing fee and the storage fee to get her car back. And if she couldn't have afforded that, then she wouldn't have been able to get her car back.
Yep.
And they would have sold it, for not being able to pay the fine.
But that's a different issue. That's not seizing your property. It's a different issue. That has to do with tow companies and
Well, that
It's a
wasn't,
different issue that needs to be addressed.
yeah, well, I'm not sure the tow company took it without the police telling them to.
Oh, I'm sure that they didn't, but that's their relationship with
Maybe.
the police. All the police had to do would be to, well, there's a lot of issues involved. in it.
Right, because the police released, right, the police released the car. It was the towing company, I guess, that wouldn't let them have it unless they paid it.
In
All
charge.
right, require police departments to bear the cost of misconduct. Require the cost of misconduct settlements to be paid out of police department budget instead of the city's general fund.
Great idea.
Restrict police departments from receiving more money from the general fund when they go over budget on lawsuit payments.
Great idea.
Get to the questions here in just a minute. I think they're pretty easy after this. Demilitarization. That's a big, that's.
Isn't this where a lot of the laws came in where you seize property during this phase quite a few years ago? And also the funding for a lot of the ammunition and that police officers get if they arrest so many, especially drug stuff. I think that's where the history is, quite a few years ago. So
Yes.
hopefully some of this changes.
Yeah. In the federal government's 1033 program providing military weaponry to local police departments. In the supply of federal military weapon, oh yeah. I looked under, there's a place on here, establish local restrictions to prevent police departments from purchasing or using military weaponry. Under that program there, I think somewhere here, somewhere I saw a chart and you could look up in your county and see how much money they had received, and Madison County had received not very much, like $1,000 and something.
From where?
Probably from this program, providing military weaponry to local police. I'm not sure if that was the right program, but it was some program that, allowed well, this is supplying military weaponry. That was, I don't know, forget I said that.
Well, it's whether it's, well, I think that's one of the big things we need to work for is demilitarizing. I mean, it's just shocked me to see in some of these confrontations, they might as well have gone in with big tanks and everything. It's just so overwhelming. You can't, it's just the opposite of community policing. And
Well,
it's just,
that's what they have on here. Restrict police departments from using federal grant money to purchase military equipment, deploying armored vehicles, weaponized aircraft, drones, Stingray surveillance equipment, camouflage uniforms, and grenade launchers. Why should a local police force have grenade launchers?
right.
Using SWAT teams unless they're an emergency situation or imminent threat to life and high-ranking officers have given approval. There's a policy they put in place in Cincinnati for that.
I totally agree with all of these, but what do you do when the citizenry has weapons that exceed the capacity of what the police weapons have?
Oh, what would that be?
An RPG.
Bombs, grenades, the same kind of things you're talking about.
Yeah.
So when they're using them in mass, they're, like you're saying, like in the case of a riot or something?
Or just anybody,
Well, what about the militia? I mean,
Yes.
you've got the militia going state capitals.
They're legal. They're doing
No,
that
they're
legal.
not legal. They're not
Legal to carry those weapons they're carrying?
They cannot-
Maybe not in the,
You cannot carry weapons into a state
Right,
government facility.
right. Not into the Capitol. Well, that's the enforcement. So we're saying we have to call out the military, the police department has to.
I don't see where a grenade launcher would assist with that.
I think what they did recently, they used pepper spray when they were coming into the courthouse I think it was in Michigan, I believe,
Mhm.
when they had the armed people. And they
They
used
didn't do anything in Michigan. But what would they have done? You know, when you're confronted with a situation, which we might, I'm sorry, be confronted with in a few weeks. Armed
absolutely
militias, you know,
pretty
that,
scary.
I think if you put restrictions like they were talking about on when you can use these things locally, we've got, and I would only, the only thing I can think we use the government, I mean, the military stuff for is it's called ILEA, ILEA. Don't ask me what it stands for, but it's this big super van thing that they got with the county that they use for situations where there's people are being held hostage, those kind of situations, super serious events. And they may be getting some military stuff from there. They're pretty well equipped.
Well, just think about Ferguson and the tanks there. To me, that's ridiculous.
Right.
Well,
I think, you know, if you have people and they're working more with de-escalation techniques, you know, de-escalation training, and you know, you're training a lot that your police are not going to be in such danger.
well, I think if you're dealing with an armed militia, it's a different
Well,
situation. And these people in this situation, that's not their focus. And I think if you look, I don't know that I've seen grenade launchers, and I, you know, I could be wrong. I haven't seen them being used against people.
not yet.
Well,
No, it just encourages the mindset, the military mindset, and we don't want our police to be military people.
well, who are you going to call in to fight the militia then? The military?
Maybe.
I think the militia has been allowed to escalate to the point to where it gets to from the beginning because they were not, things that were going on were not stopped in the beginning, you know.
Absolutely. But we have to face them now when those people are no longer in authority. We've got to turn it around and be looking, you know, you're talking about getting rid of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. There are certain situations where military type weaponry may be necessary. Not, and it's your direction of who you're using it against and in what situations, which requires, like they said, a well-defined policy of when these things can be used. They actually, I mean, I actually heard you say that, right? That was a proposal.
I like that. Yeah, that's
You
good.
know, if you've got to be, you know, you can't say, okay, we can't have grenades because that sounds horrible. Well, yeah, it sounds horrible, but I'm sure the police could tell you of situations, you know, half the stuff that goes on in this country, we don't find out about because it would scare the bewillies out of us. So they don't tell us, you know, oh, well, the FBI thwarted this thing that happened 20 years ago. They'll tell you now, but they don't tell you at the time. There's a lot of stuff that goes on that we don't know. And if it's regulated properly, then we won't have issues of this. And if it, God forbid, would happen, then you have to enforce getting rid of that person.
Well, then maybe there needs to be specifically trained forces and, you know, statewide or something instead of every local police force has.
I'm getting there, Carol. If you've got a situation, it's got to be faced now. Are you going to call Springfield and said, send me down that group that can use grenades? You know, it's an hour and a half away. You have to, you know, you have to be prepared for situations, and there has to be regulations and rules, which I'm sure there are. I tell you, I don't know of a grenade in Madison County.
Okay, well, it's, you know, maybe that's one thing, and maybe they have that somewhere. That would be interesting to look into what is the military.
Illinois, and we need to worry about Illinois.
Well, in Illinois, I don't know. I have to find that chart. There were some counties in Illinois that received quite a bit of, well, I don't know if it's actually equipment though. Let's look at the unions here. So we can look at these policy solutions on the unions. So when we go to answer the questions, the con on a couple of the first questions is going to be about the police unions. Is they're saying that a lot of reforms that you're trying to make will not be able to take place as long as the police unions are not reformed. The
Can I share something right now?
uh-huh.
I know in Austin, Texas, they worked almost 10, I believe it was almost 10 years, 8 to 10 years, and they changed the policies. They worked at changing the policies because they couldn't change anything else until some of the policies they're talking about. But it took
Is that
a long
union
time
in the
because-
unions?
Yes,
Yeah.
because the unions didn't allow it, and once they started working with it, so they just made some changes just recently, and I haven't watched all of them, but that's one of the things that they talked about, is it took a long time to take away some of the power that was causing some of the problem, taking a power away from the unions.
And that's what they have here. So they say the police unions can be good because they can, you know, guarantee wages, you know, and some of the other things like that, you know, for the police. But this says unions have used their influence to establish unfair protection for police officers in their contracts with local, state, and federal government and in statewide law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights. They create one set of rules for police and another for civilians and make it difficult for police chiefs or civilian oversight structures to punish officers who are unfit to serve. So this says accountability, remove barriers to effective misconduct investigations and civil oversight. So this shows you some of the things, remove contract provisions, local policies and provisions that allow officers to wait 48 hours or more before being interrogated after an incident, prevent investigators from pursuing other cases of misconduct revealed during an investigation, prevent an officer's name or picture from being released to the public, prohibit civilians from having the power to discipline, subpoena, or interrogate police officers. These are all things that the unions protect. State that police chief has the sole authority to discipline police officers. Enable officers to appeal a disciplinary decision to a hearing board of other police officers. Enables officers to use the contract grievance process to have an outside arbitrator reverse disciplinary decisions and reinstate officers who have committed misconduct. Prevent an officer from being investigated for an incident that happened 100 or more days prior. Allows an officer to choose not to take a lie detector test without being punished. Requires a civilian who is accusing that officer of misconduct to pass a lie detector first, or prevent the officer's test results from being considered as evidence of misconduct.
You cannot use a lie detector test against a civilian in criminal courts nationwide. That should not be an issue here. Lie detector tests.
I don't think it's a criminal test. It's a court. It's an investigation they're talking about. They're talking about that the unions have set up rules that require these things right here. Police
Right.
union
Requires a civilian who's accusing an officer has to take a lie detector test before they give a lie detector test to the officer.
It's not clear. It's not clear to me what you're talking.
Well, right. Well, the union says that you have, if there's a civilian who's accusing an officer of misconduct, that civilian has to pass the lie detector first before you give a lie detector test to the officer.
Okay, my next question is, when you're saying the union, this is what union?
Police unions.
Every one of them is different.
Yes, that's
Every
right.
one of them is different. That none of this stuff could be happening locally or statewide. All of this,
well, I think the thing is that you don't want every union to be able to be different. You need statewide
does
policy.
Illinois have any? Okay,
I
well,
don't know.
that's the thing we need to know. Because if they already have restrictions, then we don't have to have a policy on it.
Well, I think we would still have a, the league would have a position that says we support.
Okay, but we don't know whether to support or recommend at this point.
Well, let's see what that question says when we get the question. Keep officer, we're almost done. We're almost ready to look at the questions quickly. Keep officers' disciplinary history accessible to police department and the public. Remove contract provisions, local and state policies, and provisions in state law enforcement officer bills of the rights that allow police officers to expunge or destroy records of past misconduct, both sustained and unsustained, from the disciplinary file. So now I guess they can do that in some places. Prevent their disciplinary records from being released to the public via Freedom of Information Act request. Some unions, I guess, protect that. Ensure financial accountability for officers and police departments that kill or seriously injure civilians. Remove contract provisions that require officers to be given paid administrative leave or paid desk duty during an investigation following a police shooting or other use of deadly force. Prevent officers from receiving unpaid suspensions as discipline for misconduct, or allow officers to use vacation or discretionary time to pay themselves while on suspension. Allow officers to receive paid leave or paid desk duty after being charged with a felony offense. I don't know if those things would stop a police officer from, say, oh, I'm not going to be able to use my vacation to pay for my time off if I do this, shoot someone, but I guess it goes to the culture of the police force.
It's just enough to protect people from consequences.
All right. Let's look now. We got like 15 minutes left today. Let's look at these questions, and hopefully this information will have helped us. The first question is building trust and nurturing legitimacy on both sides of the police-citizen divide foundational to positive relationships between law enforcement agencies and communities they serve? I think that's kind of a
No-brainer.
yeah. I don't know.
They always throw you the softball first.
Well, and the cons on this is that these reforms cannot be accomplished without the abolition of this police and the prison system. They are a significant number of organizations who share the same goals of structural reform, but argue that cannot be achieved within the given institutional structure and composition of law enforcement agencies and the power and influence of police unions who resist police accountability. In order for this type of system of equitable and just protect and serve described here to be achieved, they argue for the abolition of the police and the prison system. I'm not sure that's a con that would be.
I've always thought instead of police, we should call them police, not instead of force, we should call them police service, because that's a different mind thought when you think of force rather than service. And to me, a police officer should service our community, not be a force against us. So wording, I think, is crucial in the way we word things too in some of these.
I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Should law enforcement agency, this is 6B, should law enforcement agencies collaborate with community members to develop police strategies to reduce crime? This kind of brings up something that was not covered in that other thing. Communities must be respected and valued in order for there to be positive response. So the community input and insight is essential if law enforcement is to respond properly. Both the community and the police departments are responsible for developing ways of ongoing collaboration with the community that will lead to more deflection from arrest by using community resources and responding in a creative, less punitive manner. I don't know what that means. This brought up something that I collaborate with community members. Let's see. I think there's a question that comes up later about technology where I want to bring something up. So that question is, should law enforcement agencies collaborate with community members to develop the policies and strategies to reduce crime? I mean, a community can come up with strategies to reduce crime, like, maybe we need to have more after school programs for our young people? Would that help reduce crime? Probably not crime. I mean, anytime a law enforcement agency works with community members to develop policies and strategies, it would be positive, wouldn't it?
Well, it depends. If they come up with solutions and not just and solutions backed by studies or
Right, data driven,
data driven, not just, oh, I don't want the police to do this kind of stuff. You
right,
know, it has to be people who are qualified, mental health experts.
right.
Um,
Well, so there's every community should define the appropriate form and structure of civilian oversight to meet the needs of that community. So they're saying, you know, that it might not be a one solution that works everywhere.
yeah,
Incidents involving suspect death or officer involved shooting should be subject to both external and internal oversight. Agencies should refrain from using practices such as quotas for traffic or pedestrian stops that are not directly related to improving public safety, such as for generating revenue. Those all come under that question. So C is, should law enforcement adopt model policies and best practices for current technology-based community engagement that increases community trust and access? Some technology is not conducive to increasing trust, so there's a need for community's input. This is the one that I wanted to bring up that I found so interesting. Some types of technology are not desirable, or those that are more appropriate for military than for police. Is my experience in Brooklyn. So in Brooklyn, Illinois, it's down by Madison. They have, and they said this is, they're kind of a testing, it's testing from the state of Illinois. They have cameras, I don't know the name of it, Susan, maybe you do, those cameras. They have cameras everywhere on all the streets in and out of their community that will track cars. They can track the license plate of a car. And so in the instance I had is so there's a police chase, and instead of chasing them on into Missouri or somewhere, they wait, and when that car comes back into the Brooklyn area, they'll get a ping on their computer that identifies that car as being back into the territory. So that's one way of not having to do the police chase. But also they said they can show where any car has been at any time in the past, you know, weeks, months, year, I'm not sure how long, but so it's a surveillance thing. So the technology, and the police chief there told me that they were given this state testing to do this in Brooklyn because the state police trusted the police force there, whereas some neighboring communities, the state might not trust those communities to not abuse that. That's what the police chief told me.
it's not testing, Carol. That is part of police agencies. That's part of their tools. It's not a test in the state.
Well, this program, the program that he has, whatever he had a name for it, the program that he had, he said was not in use by all of the communities in the area. And
No,
whatever it is.
you have it, use it.
Well, I know, but he said they don't all have it. What, I don't know. He had a specific thing. So the question is, the technology is, what technology is available to be used to make the community safe? But at what point should there be community say, do we want that degree of surveillance in our community? Does the community not have any say into that? Is that just up to the police force?
Or you're like using this now again in the what's the term? Damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you get mugged on the street, you want those cameras to catch it so that you can find the person, or if you get robbed. But what, you don't want them there for what? When you're picking your nose? I mean, if you're
I
not,
might not, it depends on the trust of the community, the police department. I might not want the police to know everywhere to know my business and everywhere that I go.
Carol, everybody knows your business. They can look it up on the internet. you know,
Thanks.
technology is so far advanced that, and I mean, have you seen this being abused? In the case that you're talking about with the car, which I'm aware of, they couldn't charge anyone because they couldn't see the driver.
I did not see, in
ultimately,
that case, I did not see it
justice is
abused.
done.
Okay, all right. I'm just saying that there, so what is this questions? I said, should there be community engagement that increases community trust and access? Should the community have any say? My question is, should the community have any say over what technology the police use in their community?
I think they should, because I could see body cams where we have face recognition at some point, and that scares me because it reminds me of China and other places that monitor and dictate what people can do.
They can track you by your cell phone
I
in
know.
China. I mean, by your something, what was it? Cell phone calls, yeah.
And
But
there are restrictions and laws in the United States when they are enforced properly, that don't allow this to happen. And just as a local event that I was involved in, the village of Glen Carbon bought 2 drones.
Mhm.
And there are a lot of restrictions from the state on how those drones can be used by police officers. It's also used by the village to find water leaks and sewer problems and all kinds of other things. And there are all kind of restrictions on them for the police. The police set up 2 sessions to the public to come, and before they were purchased, to learn about this, to talk about this, to express their concerns so that they could be addressed. And nobody showed up.
I don't think I knew about those.
I didn't know about those. Sometimes those things get announced in the paper the day they happen and they're already over.
Well, no, it didn't, because I was on those because I was against them buying it in the beginning. I was their biggest objector. And I think the police chief was going, why did we put this lady on this committee? She's supposed to be in favor of what we do. And I immediately jumped up and threw an absolute fit about buying 2 drones. And I said, the community is not going to understand this. They're going to be objecting to it. They're not going to understand all the restrictions you have. I mean, we've got a protocol on it that's 2 inches thick.
So who holds the police accountable for the use of their
The
technology?
state of Illinois does.
The people will complain to the state of Illinois.
What?
But
I just want,
couldn't
yeah.
something like this just be addressed by a little transparency and a citizen review board?
I
You know,
guess.
this is a new policy, we want to use drones, or we want to use road cameras. This is how we're going to use them. These are the restrictions. These are the non-restrictions, and have some kind of citizen opportunity for citizens to oversee that kind of stuff and give feedback on it.
Well,
And
I
I'm
just,
trying to
right.
regulate all this stuff we don't really understand.
I think there needs to be something, because that's where you come into a police state. You know, when they say a police state where they know everything you do, and they might anyway, you know, but I just, you know, that, I don't know. So,
But
let's,
if you have citizens who are, there is like some kind of a review board, there's input and there's some transparency. I understand
Right.
concerns about privacy and stuff like that, but you know, like in Glen Carbon, okay, we don't need road cameras, we don't need drones, but right now there's a lot of people coming into Glen Carbon committing robberies and all kinds of stuff, and then there's no ability to catch them without road cameras or something like that. And if citizens are aware of what the police are doing and have some insight as to what kind of regulations control that, there's at least an opportunity to have citizen feedback and, you know, communication between police and citizens. It seems like that would be a better solution than trying to regulate up front.
I agree. But there comes a point in time when people need to take some responsibility themselves. And you know, being on the board for Glen Carbon, there's so much that I see that people don't take an interest in. And I haven't seen any abuse of anything. And that's when the issues come out. That's when everybody comes out and is complaining.
Mhm.
And I know you didn't hear about it. I complained when Hightower was the head of the education, whatever, because he would say, well, we put these announcements in the Intelligencer. And I said, I wouldn't pay a dime for that little rag. I said, I got more information from you putting it on the announcement board outside of what used to be the old high school, because I drove to work there every day.
Right.
So
There needs to be multiple ways to disseminate the information.
we put it out on the website for Glen Carbon. We put it out on Facebook from Glen Carbon. We put it in the newspapers from Glen Carbon. I mean, I don't know. Is there another, should we announce it on the siren with the tornado warnings?
Well, yeah, just come knocking on my door.
No,
Anyway,
I
can we
wouldn't
move on? Okay.
do that.
Should community policing be the guiding philosophy for all
No.
stakeholders?
They just said that doesn't work. All these things that you just quoted to us from this study said community policing doesn't work.
Well,
Go
right.
knocking door to door. You can't.
I'm not talking about, I know you can't go knocking door to door to announce every meeting. Okay.
But people don't go to the meetings. How many people watch on Facebook, watch the village board meetings or the committee meetings?
What is the purpose of what are you saying? What are you saying?
I'm saying that people don't care. That people don't care unless
Right.
there's
How does that relate to the question?
I think this started because I was talking about some kind of citizen review board.
Right.
And I think that she's saying, who are you going to get to do that? And that is a real question.
Okay, so there needs to be encouragement for people to do that. Or we need to take responsibility.
It's got to be people who have the background and, I don't want to say ability. That sounds very elitist. But, they're going to be reviewing professionals and they're going to have some kind of expertise. You just can't.
Okay, because it's hard to get people, it's not a reason not to do it. You have to put it in place and then find the people.
Whatever.
Anyway, all right, so the questions, let's look at these other couple of questions just so you can know what they are, because we got like 2 minutes. Should community policing be the guiding philosophy? Okay, we're saying that this task force says the definition in it, community policing. Community policing emphasizes working with neighborhood residents to co-produce public safety. Community should support a culture and practice of policing that reflects the values of protection and promotion of the dignity of all, especially the most vulnerable, such as children and youth most at risk for crime or violence. Law enforcement agencies should avoid using law enforcement tactics that unnecessarily stigmatize youth and marginalize their participation in schools. Oh boy, where law enforcement officers should have limited involvement in discipline and communities. Okay, we have Jane. All right, I'm gonna read this other question and then we need to come back to, we didn't cover this about, and Jane has prepared a part about the school to prison pipeline. I think we're gonna have to hold that for the next time. And about,
But Carol, you told me I could do mine tonight.
well, it's not, we're only going till 9 o'clock. So you're gonna have to wait next time too. I don't know how we're gonna get this all in. I went too long, I guess. These other questions, if you look at the other questions that we will be considering is, should quality training and education begin with recruits and continue throughout the officer's career? I think that's pretty ongoing evidence-based training of officers and maybe looking at the recruits.
Good luck with that. But yes, that's good. That's where it needs to be.
Is the wellness or the health and safety of law enforcement officers critical, not only for the officers, their colleagues, and their agencies, but also to public safety? That's kind of a no-brainer too. And it's saying though that there should be mandatory mental health checks, officers, as well as fitness, resilience, and nutrition. But somewhere in here it says like, should the officer be responsibility? The con to that was some people say should be responsibility of individual officers to seek mental and physical health support and treatment that they need, instead of that being part of, supporting the police officers. I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer for me that the wellness, health, and safety of law officers is critical to them, and we need to, you know, provide the care that they need for that. But that's also to the public safety too, because if they're mentally unable to handle what they're doing, then they shouldn't be engaging with the public.
Absolutely.
Is it desirable for police to use alternatives whenever possible to deflect offenders from arrest?
Absolutely.
These seem
Pretty-
pretty vague and no-brainers,
Right.
especially after the other Campaign Zero stuff we were looking at.
After the, well, and that's what some of the key, so then their last question was, well, that was based on, that was the last question they came up was, which was, how does policing keep people out of mass incarceration? Now, we didn't have time, now it's 9 o'clock. So the question that Jane, hopefully Jane, are you there? I'm sorry. So Jane has, she can talk about, hopefully the next time, I told her she prepared it for this time. I'm sorry, about,
It's fine. I'll fine tune it a little bit.
okay, about the school to prison.
I'm glad to have more time. Thank
Okay,
you.
about school to prison pipeline, that might be something that you hear, a phrase you hear, and what that means and how that can keep people, young people out of the criminal justice system. And so that kind of comes up under, there's, you know, a part in here about, that would come up under this last part about, under the last question that's under there. So I don't know if we're going to get this all, I took an awful long time. There's one question coming up that involves a lot of pages here, and I have to get a volunteer who's willing to do that, and that is on, I don't know, I have to look at which one. I can't tell which it is. We might, I don't know if we're going to get the rest of these all covered under one more. It's courtroom, sentencing laws and procedures, I think. Emerging adults, courtroom procedures and access, those are pretty quickly covered. Incarceration and mandatory supervised release, post-incarceration successful reentry, and then the last one is funding to look at too. So I need some committee members who are willing to take some of these so you don't have to listen to me again. And Susan's going to recover her part. I mean, she's going to do the question on, what was that for? Trial procedures, right. If Jane does prison to school pipeline, Susan does pretrial procedures. Like I said, that emerging adults, courtroom procedures and access, those are pretty quickly covered. Hopefully we can get the rest of them covered in the next session. If not, what is the consensus that we should do? Let people investigate those on their own, schedule another Zoom, or wait and see if what we get covered.
Are we required to cover all of them?
No, we're not required to cover them. We just have to, there will be questions about all of those in the consensus study. So people can do the reading on their own and just be prepared to answer the,
I think, Carol, a lot of them are going to overlap. So that some of those questions that will come up, will have already reviewed the issues behind them.
Right, a lot on some of them by the things that I just went over now do cover some of those things too.
Right.
Then why don't you see what we get done with next meeting and make a decision then?
Okay, all right.
Well, I would just like to mention, all of this information can be accessed on the state website. Is that correct?
Yes.
So people can read ahead of time
Yes.
and have specific questions or comments.
Yes.
And I want to talk about briefly the community involvement. At the end of January, the League of Women Voters of Illinois is doing a Zoom training for observers. So we could use some observers observing county board, the village board, at least we could know what's going on and perhaps make a difference in making people aware. So there will be Zoom observer training. I believe it's January 20th, but we'll be discussing that at board meeting and publicizing it in the bulletin.
Yeah, I would like to emphasize that because obviously the local reporters cannot cover every board meeting, every committee meeting, etc. So obviously, league members being observers can really play an important role. And they write these reports up, and we can make them available. So that is really important. And I know years ago, we hate to say that, but the Observer Corps was quite active. And they did get some of, I mean, years ago, some of the city council meetings was down at Rusty's, okay? And then the committee meeting. But after all the sunshine laws were passed and people started paying attention, all that stopped. So yeah, it is something that people can do. And now it's usually easy because most of them are all online, right, Susan?
Yes,
All your committee
yes.
meetings, everything online. So you
The
don't even have to
meeting
leave
is
your
on
house.
Facebook now.
Yeah,
Oh.
so it's really, that's something that, you know, get a topic that you're really interested in or one board or something and follow up on them.
The minutes are online too, but Observer
That's
Corps,
right.
could observe things and attitudes and things too that aren't, you know.
Well, I'll tell you
The
what,
only
Carol,
problem with minutes are they're not approved until the next meeting,
the
but
minutes
they're not
from
official.
Urban give
Are
you,
not up to date. They are not up to date.
they are, but they don't tell you anything either. They'll
Oh.
say this issue was looked at and this is how they voted. They don't give you any
Oh,
details.
okay. Yep.
You know, they're really worthless.
Right.
And I don't know if that's, I shouldn't say anything.
This
But
is recorded. I should have told you that earlier. We
Well,
did record this.
Well, yes, they're very trimmed down.
Right.
You're not going to hear the arguments back and forth.
right.
Right.
So that's where an observer plays an important role.
Okay. Anything else today?
When's our next meeting?
Good job.
It's the 14th.
Of January.
Is that right? It's Thursday. The second Thursday, because the first Thursday is a board
Yeah,
meeting.
but the second floor, yes, it is the 14th.
And Carol, what are we going to be covering at that? Because we had some questions. People sent emails and asking what we were going to cover in this.
Okay,
meeting.
at that one, and if I can get some committee, I need to reach out to the committee members, but we will do, Jane is first going to do school to prison pipeline. And then Susan's going to cover pre-trial procedures. And then after that is, I have to go back to my, hold on a minute. What I don't have all those questions right in front of me. Hold on, I'll get them in just a second. Then we have emerging adults. That's young people in the system, like raising the age, you know, and anyway, it's emerging adults, young people in the system, and courtroom procedures and access.
I'll do that one, Carol, since I know some information on it anyway.
Okay, study questions. I don't have, these aren't numbered, so I've lost track of number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we'll be doing question 7, 9, 10, 11, sentencing laws and procedures there's a lot of material on that. I don't know exactly what it is, but like I said, some of that might have been covered already.
Yeah.
We're going to be doing the rest of them if we can.
I think we should look at funding.
It's going to take the whole
Funding.
time.
Definitely funding, post-incarceration, accessible reentry. We can look at which ones the policy affects the most. There was a place on this there's one thing I wanted to show you really quick if I can, under this, where we were just at, that showed in Illinois, it was in the very beginning on this other site. Maybe it was under problems. It shows in, oh darn it. There's a place where you can go on here, maybe it's under solutions. You can go and it will show you in Illinois what solutions that they suggested have been proposed and passed. I'll try to find that and reference that for the newsletter.
And Carol, could you send me the link to this Campaign Zero site?
Right. Yes.
So I'll include that. People can review it for the next meeting.
I'm not, that site was from one, it's one organization, it's one thing, but it did include the same study that the league looked at, the president's task force. And it was a little bit easier for me to understand than some of the league material.
Yeah, it's certainly more specific and practical.
There are videos. If you go to that state league site also, you look up, you just Google Illinois, or that, it'll be in the bulletin, but the Illinois Criminal Justice Study position, they do have videos and some of them are short, but if you're a visual person, you might get more out of those videos, short videos about some of these topics. So thank you for staying in here, hanging in here.
Thank you for doing this.
And then the committee will, after we do this, ask the committee members, I know Barb and Brent sent us a review. We have to summarize these and fill out a form and get back to the state. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good
Good
night,
night.
all.
Good night.
Bye-bye.